South Florida has always sold itself as paradise. Shimmering condo towers lined up against the turquoise coastline, endless rooftop pools, glass balconies overlooking the Atlantic, and the promise that buying a slice of this skyline was more than real estate. It was a golden ticket to luxury and security. For decades, these condos weren't just homes. They were symbols of Florida's unstoppable rise. International investors treated them like vaults, retirees cashed in lifelong savings to secure a beachfront dream, and developers boasted of billion-dollar skylines as if gravity itself couldn't pull them down. But in 2025, that shimmering dream has started to fracture. The South Florida condo market, once the crown jewel of the state's economy, is in freefall. Prices are plunging, lenders are blacklisting entire buildings, and homeowners are staring down insurance premiums and repair bills they simply can't pay. The very towers that once represented prosperity are now seen as looming liabilities, monuments to a boom that believed it could never end. At the center of this crisis stands the governor of Florida, a man who, not long ago, championed the condo boom as proof that his state was bulletproof. Now, with panic spreading through communities and investors fleeing in silence, he's struggling to hold the line. His speeches, once filled with triumph, are now marked by tension and urgency. Behind closed doors, emergency meetings drag into the night. And on the faces of thousands of Floridians, from retirees to young families, you can see the same fear. Paradise is slipping away. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on how Florida's glittering condo empire rose so high, why it's now crumbling, and what the fallout means for the families caught in the storm. And most of all, we're asking the question that now haunts the governor himself. When paradise cracks, how much of Florida's dream can survive? To understand the collapse of today, we first have to rewind to the glittering rise of South Florida's condo empire, a period that locals, developers, and alike remember as the golden era. This wasn't just about real estate, it was about an identity. For decades, South Florida marketed itself as a world-class playground where the ocean met the skyline, where money flowed as freely as the tide, and where condo ownership was sold not simply as property, but as a dream. After the 2008 financial crisis, when much of America's housing market lay in ruins, South Florida staged an astonishing comeback. By the early 2000s, cranes once again dotted Miami's horizon, climbing higher and higher as if daring the recession to return. Developers promised that this time was different. Foreign money, especially from Latin America, Canada, and parts of Europe, poured into Miami real estate. Condos became financial safe havens, more reliable than banks in unstable countries, and international buyers scooped up units before the first shovel of dirt was turned. Some towers sold out on pre-construction deposits alone, their lobbies still just drawings on a brochure. The transformation was breathtaking. Brickell, once a quiet banking district, exploded into a vertical city of glass and nightlife. Sunny Isles Beach rebranded itself as the Riviera of Florida, attracting Russian oligarchs, Brazilian millionaires, and international jet-setters. Fort Lauderdale, historically overshadowed by Miami, leaned into the yachting lifestyle, pairing marina slips with luxury condos to market itself as a playground for the ultra-rich. Local owners, city planners, and even the governor himself seized every opportunity to showcase these skylines as evidence of unstoppable prosperity. But it wasn't only the wealthy who bought in. Realtors turned into celebrities, their Instagram accounts filled with drone shots of luxury penthouses and champagne showings. Young professionals convinced themselves that a condo wasn't just a home, but a fast track to wealth. Retirees saw condo living as the reward for a lifetime of work, maintenance-free, glamorous, and permanent. And behind it all, property tax revenue, using the boom as proof that South Florida had entered a golden age of growth. The numbers backed up the hype. By 2019, pre-construction deposits doubled as investments. Entire towers sold out in days. Units that once cost $300,000 were flipping for nearly $1 million within a few years. The pandemic, rather than slowing things down, only accelerated the frenzy. Remote workers fleeing New York, Chicago, and California poured in with high salaries and flexible lifestyles, treating South Florida condos as both an escape and a status symbol. Realtors called it madness. Bidding wars broke out, offers came in cash, and towers that hadn't even opened yet were already waiting list exclusive. In those years, it seemed unshakable. Condos weren't just a sector of Florida's housing market, they were the market. They defined skylines, and they projected an image of Florida as the land of endless opportunity. For the governor, it was an easy narrative to embrace, a state rising higher than the rest of the country, its prosperity literally visible in towers of steel and glass. And for a while, the promise was real. Florida was booming, investors were pouring in, and the skyline stretched higher every year. The dream of paradise, built in glass and concrete, seemed untouchable. But every golden era carries the seeds of its downfall. And as we'll see next, the cracks in South Florida's condo empire weren't invisible. They were growing quietly all along, ignored in the rush to keep building higher. The warning signs nobody wanted to hear. Even as the condo towers kept rising and sales brochures promised forever paradise, cracks, both literal and metaphorical, were beginning to show. But in South Florida, nobody wanted to hear about problems. After all, when billions of dollars in real estate commissions, developer profits, and tax revenue are on the line, bad news is treated like blasphemy. The first real warning came in June 2021 when the Champlain Towers South condominium in Surfside suddenly collapsed in the middle of the night, killing 98 people. For a moment, the glossy illusion of South Florida's condo empire shattered. Engineers had long warned that saltwater corrosion, aging foundations, and deferred maintenance were ticking time bombs, and Champlain proved them right. But instead of serving as a wake-up call, the tragedy was quickly reframed. Owners promised tighter inspections, developers doubled down on new construction, and realtors reassured nervous buyers that this was an isolated incident. The money machine rolled on. Meanwhile, the invisible financial rot was spreading. Insurance companies, spooked by rising claims from hurricanes, flooding, and structural risks, began pulling out of Florida altogether. Those that stayed behind started doubling, even tripling premiums. Suddenly, owning a condo wasn't just about paying a mortgage. It meant paying thousands in monthly association fees, repair assessments, and skyrocketing insurance bills. For retirees on fixed incomes, that meant financial ruin. For younger families, it meant walking away. But the most ominous sign came from within the towers themselves. Condo boards across Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and West Palm Beach quietly circulated engineering reports warning of critical repairs. Balconies were cracking, concrete was spalling, underground parking garages were flooding more frequently with saltwater intrusion. Residents who once bragged about their luxury oceanfront views now sat in meetings staring at repair bills that read like ransom notes: $50,000, $100,000, sometimes even $200,000 per unit. And yet, the silence was deafening. Developers kept building, and the governor himself reassured the public that Florida was stronger than ever. The message was clear: the dream must not be interrupted. But behind the curtain, the storm clouds were already gathering, and the foundation of South Florida's real estate empire was beginning to crumble under its own weight. The crash hits home. By 2025, the illusion could no longer hold. The numbers told the story long before the headlines did. Condo sales across Miami-Dade dropped off a cliff. Inventory piled up like unsold cars on a dealer's lot, and for the first time in decades, for sale signs outnumbered construction cranes. What was once a seller's paradise had turned into a buyer's ghost town. The dream had officially cracked. The trigger wasn't one single event. It was a perfect storm. Interest rates rose just enough to cool speculation. Insurers withdrew en masse, and banks began refusing to issue mortgages on buildings with unresolved safety issues. Suddenly, thousands of condo owners discovered their units were unsellable. The very towers that were supposed to be lifelong assets had transformed into financial prisons. Homeowners started defaulting. Retirees walked away from properties they could no longer afford to maintain. Foreign investors, once eager to stash cash in Miami real estate, quietly pulled out, selling at massive losses just to escape before the market sank further. Entire buildings became war zones of lawsuits, foreclosures, and abandoned units. Maintenance fees skyrocketed because fewer residents were paying, which only pushed more people into default. It was a vicious cycle, one that spread like wildfire. And then came the breaking point. A handful of high-profile collapses, not physical collapses but financial ones, made national news. Luxury condos once valued at over $1 million sold at auction for half that. Real estate agents, once bragging about bidding wars, found themselves begging for buyers. Suddenly, the national media swooped in, calling South Florida's condo market the ground zero of America's next housing crash. The governor, who had built part of his reputation on Florida's booming growth, was now facing the nightmare scenario. Cameras caught him visibly frustrated at press conferences. His usual confident tone gave way to sharp, defensive outbursts. He accused the media of exaggeration, blamed federal regulators for overreach, and insisted Florida would weather the storm. But Floridians weren't buying it. They were watching their life savings vanish. In kitchens across Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and West Palm, the conversations were all the same. Do we sell now? Do we stop paying? Do we sue? The crash wasn't just an abstract market correction. It was dinner table panic, it was retirement plans collapsing, it was entire neighborhoods suddenly feeling like traps instead of havens. For the first time in decades, paradise was officially in crisis. The governor loses his cool. The breaking point came live on camera. During a press conference meant to reassure Floridians, the governor's frustration finally boiled over. What was supposed to be a carefully staged event, a calm, confident statement to ease fears, quickly spiraled into something else. Reporters pressed him relentlessly, asking about collapsing condo values, abandoned buildings, and retirees facing bankruptcy. Each question cut deeper, exposing the cracks not only in the market but in the leadership holding it together. Instead of the steady, measured tone that people expected, the governor snapped. His voice grew louder with every answer, his hands slammed against the podium, and the tension in the room was unmistakable. Then came the line that would define the moment. "This is not a collapse," he shouted. "Florida is strong, our real estate is resilient, and anyone saying otherwise is fueling panic." But instead of calming fears, the outburst had the opposite effect. The anger, the defensiveness, the sheer loss of composure. It was a moment that made the crisis feel more real than any statistic ever could. Clips of the governor's meltdown spread across social media within hours, replayed with captions like "denial in real time" and "if he's panicking, we should panic too." Television networks ran the footage on loop, dissecting every gesture and word. Analysts called it the moment confidence collapsed, while ordinary Floridians shared it in group chats with grim commentary. If the governor's losing it, what chance do we have? For many, that was the moment the disaster crossed a line. It was no longer just numbers on a chart or rumors in the financial press. If the state's top leader was visibly cracking under pressure, then the crisis wasn't just behind closed doors anymore. It was out in the open. It was raw. It was public, and it was spiraling out of control. Fallout in the streets. The governor's meltdown was a spark in a room filled with gasoline. His angry words spread across Florida faster than the storm clouds that usually haunt its summers. And within days, the people hit hardest by the crash were no longer suffering quietly in their condos. They were out on the streets. In Miami's downtown, hundreds gathered with handmade signs, "We can't pay," "Our homes are hostages," and "Paradise is broken." Retirees who had gambled their life savings on oceanfront living stood shoulder to shoulder with younger families crushed by endless assessments. Chants of frustration echoed down Brickell Avenue, a street once known as the Wall Street of the South. Now, it looked like a stage for economic rebellion. The protests weren't isolated. In Fort Lauderdale, residents from 3 separate condo towers marched together, carrying copies of their skyrocketing insurance bills. One woman held up her statement for cameras. Monthly coverage had jumped from $450 to over $2,000 in a single year. Another man shouted into a megaphone that his building demanded $120,000 per unit in emergency repairs, warning that if he didn't pay, his family would lose their home. The crowd roared back, "We can't pay! We won't pay!" Inside condo board meetings, tempers boiled over. Local news cameras captured shouting matches between board members and residents. One viral clip showed an elderly man pounding the table with his fist as he accused his board of hiding inspection reports that had flagged structural risks years earlier. Another video showed younger residents demanding resignations, accusing developers and local owners of conspiring to protect profits while leaving ordinary homeowners to drown. These once mundane meetings, usually focused on landscaping budgets and pool maintenance, had turned into battlegrounds. Meanwhile, Florida's glittering condo skyline was visibly darkening. Social media exploded with drone footage of half-empty towers at night, their windows black, their lobbies abandoned. TikTok videos titled "Florida's Ghost Condos" racked up millions of views, each clip reinforcing the idea that the state's luxury dream had become a hollow shell. Realtors privately admitted that many units had been sitting on the market for months with zero offers. For the governor, the fallout was devastating. Every protest sign, every viral video, and every angry condo meeting became ammunition for his critics. The narrative shifted. He wasn't just a leader caught in an economic downturn. He was the face of denial, arrogance, and failure. The man who once championed Florida's unstoppable growth was now portrayed as the captain of a sinking ship. What made it worse was the emotional toll. This wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It was about people's lives unraveling. Families who had dreamed of passing down beachfront condos to their children now faced foreclosure. Retirees were being forced to return to work to cover assessments. And renters, who had no ownership stake but still lived in these towers, found themselves caught in the crossfire, with landlords jacking up rents to cover costs or walking away entirely. The fallout in the streets wasn't just anger. It was grief. It was betrayal. It was the realization that the paradise they were promised had been built on shaky foundations, both literally and financially. And for many Floridians, this was the point of no return. When Paradise Cracks South Florida once sold itself as paradise, a place where ocean views promised security, where glass towers symbolized wealth, and where the dream seemed as permanent as the coastline itself. But in 2025, that illusion shattered. The condo crash revealed what many had long feared. Paradise was fragile, and the foundations beneath it were far weaker than anyone wanted to admit. For homeowners, the fallout was devastating. Lifelong savings vanished. Retirements were ruined. Families who thought they owned pieces of forever were left with bills, lawsuits, and abandoned towers. For entire communities, the crash didn't just strip away financial stability. It tore at their identity, exposing the gap between the glossy brochures and the hard reality of living on borrowed time. At the center of it all stood the governor. Once the loudest voice celebrating Florida's unstoppable rise, now the figure most associated with its painful fall. His anger, his defensiveness, his refusal to acknowledge the depth of the crisis, all of it became part of the story. Whether fairly or not, he became the symbol of a state leader caught unprepared when paradise cracked. And yet, the crisis left behind a larger truth. This was never just about condos. It was about climate change, unchecked development, financial greed, and the cost of ignoring warnings until it's too late. Florida's glittering skyline, once a monument to ambition, now stands as a cautionary tale, proof that no market, no dream, and no leader is immune from collapse. The question now isn't whether Florida can rebuild its condo market. It will, in some form. The real question is whether its people and its leaders have learned the lesson hidden in the rubble, that dreams built on fragile ground will always come with a price. Because in the end, paradise doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes slowly, it cracks quietly, and then, one day, it falls. And everyone is left asking the same haunting question: how did we not see it coming?